Hello, everybody. I am the Linkzilla, and, well, today I finally got to see the Five Nights at Freddy's film adaptation, and, well, I've got a few things to say about it. Honestly, when it comes to Five Nights at Freddy's being adapted into a feature film, it seemed like a very obvious thing that could very easily happen. Though I gotta say, despite being a fan of the franchise since I would say near the beginning. I actually didn't discover the franchise until after Fnaf 2 was out, and I had to finally figure out what all this was about. Anyway, despite all of that, I was actually one of the people who was the most against the idea of Fnaf getting a film adaptation, and the reasons why I'll try to basically explain. A lot of this is my own subjective bias, but I legit think that with how things have gone with the franchise, the creators of the franchise would have absolutely no idea how to make a proper movie based on this IP. And it really disappoints me because you would have basically the perfect formula to make a movie based off of the first FNAF game, and then you could easily make one based off the second one, and then the third one. But maybe I just am set in my own ways and have problems letting go, but I feel somewhat vindicated about a lot of things in regards to this movie, considering that one of the big problems of this movie is that, well, let's not split hairs. This movie basically got announced as being in the works as far back as, when did this franchise start? 2014, 2015? I'm pretty sure that at that point, I'm pretty sure that this movie got announced shortly after Scott released Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the final chapter, the supposed final chapter. But the thing about it is that it also came with the revelation that Scott was putting out a novel, Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes. And now we're going to have to talk about Silver Eyes later on, but for right now, what I'm saying is that, let's see, FNAF 4, I'm pretty sure, man, my memory is all sketchy. I'm pretty sure that all of this, that FNAF basically began in 2014, and so this basically didn't come to a head until 2015, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe 2016, I honestly can't remember at this point. The point is, this movie has been in production hell for years at this point. This movie has been in production for literally almost as long as the franchise itself has existed. So this has basically been a long time coming. And it was just one problem after another. Basically, nobody could agree on how the movie should work. Nobody can agree on what story beats should be in there. There were several scripts that were chosen, tossed out, rewritten, a whole bunch of things. The project changed hands a few times. And unfortunately, when you look at the history of cinema, when you look at movies that get stuck in production hell for this long and have all these kind of back and forth changes, it creates a too many cooks in the kitchen scenario when and it basically always usually ends the same with this project being a bit of a mess. And so, ultimately, that was one of the reasons why I thought that this movie not only was never actually going to happen, never get off the ground, but why it ultimately shouldn't happen, because it ultimately felt like, well, it was just too complicated, that people couldn't actually agree on what this film should be, when, quite frankly, what this film should be is relatively simple. But after all this time, the movie actually did get made. And I gotta admit, following the production of this movie, I was somewhat excited about the concept that not only was Blumhouse Studios basically producing this film, because they've actually had some pretty good horror movies over the last decade or so. They basically have made a name for themselves by actually being really good at delivering horror in the kind of sense that I think would work for Fnaf, but also the fact that the animatronic characters, instead of being CGI, were actually going to be actual animatronic puppets created by Jim Henson's workshop. So, basically, you've got the people who made the Muppets and most of Star Wars' creature effects. Yeah, they're basically making the Five Nights at Freddy's animatronics. So, that ultimately excited me, but as time went on, I basically began to realize that there were things I was seeing popping up in the movie that I ultimately didn't care for. But maybe I've ultimately set the stage enough. How do I find the movie itself? Honestly, I can throw up my hands and say it's a bit of a mixed bag. Do I regret seeing it? No. Did I have fun watching it? Did I enjoy watching the movie? I would say kind of, because I'm not 100% sure that it's a definite yes. I would say that the movie is good, but as a diehard FNAF fan, I think that there are some things that made it into the movie that really weren't that necessary, and that there were some things about it that was definitely a bit confusing. I'm going to basically try and save off spoilers until I get to a designated spoiler section for this video, but what I can definitely say is that this movie, it has the feeling of several different writers and several different scripts. Like, this movie was rewritten several times. It honestly kind of feels like, at the end of the day, a bunch of scripts that got rejected. Lots of things got recycled from those scripts and kind of meshed together in an unsatisfying way. And it kind of reflects poorly on the final product of the film. So, but I think that for both a general movie-going audience and maybe fans of FNAF, this is a pretty good movie. I think that a general going audience will like this film if they like horror movies, because it's fairly simple to understand, it's fairly reasonable to get into, and I think that, like with the people who grew up with Chuck E. Cheese, they definitely will get scared of this. I mean, I tried to tempt my sister into going to see the movie with me, asking if she had ever heard of the Five Nights series, and when she hadn't, I basically told her, the gist of it is, what if the animatronics at Chuck E. Cheese were haunted? She immediately shut it down. Like, she wants nothing to do with those animatronic characters from Chuck E. Cheese, because she's one of the people who were genuinely afraid of those things. So, maybe I've told that story already. I don't care. It's not like you guys are going to hold me to it. The point that I'm sort of getting at is that the general audiences who probably don't know much about this series, if they are into horror, they can ultimately get into this movie. It definitely has a few good scares and a lot of tense moments. I'm not sure about, like, the gore hounds, if they basically like movies with high body counts. There's definitely one scene that contributes to the body count factor, but I gotta say that in terms of violence, this movie is actually pretty tame. But I do think that fans of Five Nights at Freddy's, if they can get past their own personal biases, they're definitely going to enjoy this movie, and they're definitely going to laugh and chuckle at all the Easter eggs and all the shout-outs to the fan base that the movie makes. So, honestly, if you're a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, I say go see this movie. Okay, so now that I've basically gotten my recommendation out of the way, I'm going to start talking about spoilers. So, if you still want to see the movie, turn back now, because I'm going to spoil it for you, and I cannot lie. My personal biases are going to bleed through into this synopsis as I spoil the movie, because I got to give my own personal take on it. Effectively speaking, like I said, there are points in this movie where it feels like several different scripts were all mishmashed together, and sometimes the film doesn't have the best way of conveying certain ideas to the audience. For example, there's one point early in the movie when we're being introduced to Mike and his sister Abby, where out of nowhere we're given a flashback to Mike working his previous job as a security guard, and we're not given any indication that it was a flashback. What I mean by that is, in Mike's introductory scene, we see him waking up at 6 a.m. and getting dressed to go someplace, and we can presume he's going to work. We see him getting dressed, he's putting on a nice shirt and a tie, he's trying to get Abby to come out of the little bed fort that she's made for herself, but Abby is, she's not being cooperative. He's really trying to keep his patience, so that's the scene that introduces our two main protagonists, and then it cuts to Mike at his job working security at a mall, and apparently he's currently on break with a fellow security guard, and they're talking about a book that Mike is reading called Dream Theory. That, I think, is another Easter egg that the movie basically has a dream theory, because, like, that's basically what Fnaf post Fnaf 4 basically turned into. It's all about the dream theory, but it also ties into Mike's character in a sense. Anyway, we have no indication that this is a flashback. The only indication that we get that this is a flashback is what happens after this scene, because what goes on in this scene is that Mike, he is standing in line trying to get, like, I don't know, a frozen yogurt or something, and he notices an unattended child just standing in the middle of the mall, looking around, looking kind of worried, and so he's tempted to go over there and talk to the kid, ask him where his parents are, when suddenly this older guy, this grown man, comes up and kind of grabs the kid and forcefully kind of starts dragging him along. The kid seems apprehensive about this person, doesn't seem to want to go with him, and the guy forces him to go with him. Except, since you basically know the plot of this movie and what it's eventually going to lead to, you know exactly what's about to happen, because Mike, he chases after this guy, dragging the kid along, tries to stop him, and when he finally catches up with him, Mike tackles the guy into the fountain and starts punching him in the face. He's kicking the guy's ass until his security guard friend comes along and pulls him off of him. And that's where the flashback ends. Out of nowhere, we're suddenly back with Mike at the present day, wearing the nice clothes that he was putting on as he was getting ready to go to work. And we find out that that incident was a flashback, and he's here in this, I guess, kind of court-ordered government building, trying to meet with a career counselor to see if he can get a new job. And that's where we come to Matthew Lillard. Now, I'm just going to basically be honest. Matthew Lillard being in this movie is one of those things that I didn't necessarily care for. Don't get me wrong, he's probably the biggest name actor that's actually in this film. The guy who plays Mike, I think his name is Josh or something. He was the kid that was in Zathura and Bridge to Terabithia, so he's definitely a good actor. He's got good acting chops, but I don't think he's nearly as big as Matthew Lillard. And for some reason, that kind of works for him. Because we haven't really seen this guy since he was a teenager. We haven't seen him in the better part of a decade. We also haven't seen Matthew Lillard all that much, but he was huge in the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, the guy basically got his start in the Scream franchise where, well, spoiler alert for a nearly 30-year-old movie at this point, the Scream franchise, he was one of the Ghostface killers teamed up with Billy Loomis. He was the guy that basically, had the idea to make it based off of a horror movie until Part 3 kind of retconned that. But also, if you were alive in the early 2000s, you definitely know Matthew Lillard played the live-action Shaggy from the Scooby-Doo movie. He played it in Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Doo 2, and I don't know. I don't necessarily think that Matthew Lillard does a bad job of portraying Shaggy. I think it's ultimately the writing of that movie that really fails the character. But apparently, people liked his performance as Shaggy so much that they actually brought him in to start voicing Shaggy on the cartoons. So, anyway, the point is, Matthew Lillard was such a big-name actor for this movie, and I can't help but feel like that kind of goes against the movies, because most other people in these movies, with some obvious exceptions, are complete unknowns. They don't actually kind of stand out as much, and thus their star power doesn't cloud your judgment. It doesn't cloud your perception of the movie. It's basically kind of like, I think that it's kind of basically like how the original Star Wars movies were made back in the 70s. The idea that George Lucas didn't want to go with big-name actors at the time. He wanted Star Wars to actually make people's careers. The only exception was Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin, and eventually James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader. But Jones didn't even want to be credited in the movie, so it really wasn't all that big a deal. And I don't think that Peter Cushing or Alec Guinness really overshadowed the main characters of the movies. The problem that I have with Matthew Lillard being in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is that, based on his history, his filmography, the moment that you find out he's going to be in the movie, you automatically know who he's going to be. And it's just so frustrating, because it's like, they don't even try to hide how obvious it is that he's going to be who he is, because immediately when the scene picks up, he actually meets with Mike. Mike meets with him, and they're talking about a job. He starts out being all condescending to Mike. It's like, yeah, with your track history, you basically were only at one job for like a week, another job only 2 months before you got fired. You're not even trying, are you, Mr. Mike Schmidt? And then he pauses when he reads Mike's last name, and you get the sense he recognizes the name. He knows who Mike is. And that comes with a different set of disappointment right there. So suddenly his attitude changes. He starts basically talking a bit nicer to Mike, offers him a cup of coffee, and basically says, I have a job for you. It's a security gig. And, well, Mike initially doesn't take it because he has his sister to look after, and he can't work night shifts because he has to basically sleep during the night and make sure that she's taken care of during the day. He can't basically have somebody watch her all night. It's like, anyway. And then we get into the meat of the franchise. No, not the meat of the franchise, the meat of the movie, so to speak. We basically get to the point where we find out what Mike's situation is with his sister, because Mike and his sister are basically on their own. They don't have their parents around. Their parents are gone, so Mike is basically struggling to make ends meet, taking care of his sister, and we get a kind of secondary antagonist with Mike and Abby's cruel aunt, Aunt Jane. And I'd say that this woman is kind of like a blonde Cruella de Vil stereotype. The first time we meet her, she's in the doctor's office with Mike talking about Abby, and it's clear that this complete phony of a woman is saying anything that she has to try and convince the doctor to approve on getting custody of Abby taken away from Mike, who she considers to be her, quote, degenerate nephew. And, well, it's clear that this woman really has no good intentions toward Abby. And it's like Mike says, the only reason that she wants custody of Abby is so that she can get a check from the government every month for taking care of her. And I'm just left thinking, is that really the motivation that this woman has? She just wants a child care welfare check? Because the lady looks like she's relatively well off. She's got a lawyer who's completely spineless. Also, I gotta say, the lawyer is completely wasted in this movie. This entire subplot is wasted, but I'll get to explaining that. I'm just left thinking that there's so little motive here. Like, you basically want a measly little government check that'll help you support this child, despite the fact that you're gonna have to take care of that child for, like, the next, I don't know, Abby looks like she's about maybe 9 years old, so another 9 years. Basically, like, a full decade of taking care of this kid. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that there are people in the world that are actually like that, and sometimes they don't even bother taking care of the kid. They just, like, collect the checks and move on, but the thing about those people is that they get found out. Like, they get found out that they basically aren't spending the money on the welfare of the child, so... Anyways... The problem is that Mike believes that with how badly he's struggling, maybe Abby would be better off with their aunt. That maybe she needs a more stable home because he's not in any kind of position to be able to take care of her for the long term. Something's got to change in his life. And the doctor tells him that finding a steady job will help. So, that's what inspires him to take the job at Freddy's and call back Matthew Lillard's character. So, one thing that I gotta appreciate about the fact that he calls back Matthew Lillard's character and kind of says he'll take the job, we get a brief kind of montage of scenes of Mike going over to Freddy's for the first time, unlocking the doors and kind of getting himself settled in the security office, and all the while he's doing this, we basically get dialogue from Matthew Lillard's character interspliced, describing the job and what he has to do over the phone. So, that was kind of like a nice Easter egg, the fact that all of the dialogue is done over the phone, so in a sense, it's a little reference to Phone Guy. The movie is filled with little Easter eggs to the franchise, some more obvious than others, but others are a bit more subtle. Like, I mentioned to you that Mike wakes up every day at 6 a.m. When the movie first introduces him, it fades from a black screen, and you hear an alarm going off, and you see the digital dial saying 6 a.m. before suddenly the clock and the rest of the bedroom comes in as the scene lights up. That's a reference to the series as well. There are other references to the franchise, but we don't want to be here all day. So, anyways, this is honestly the point in the series where I actually do like the movie a lot at this point in the movie, and I honestly can't help but shrug my shoulders and wonder, did they actually pay attention to me when I was telling them how this movie should be done? Because, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, people, I've had my own vision of how this movie should be done for a long time. And I even have it written down somewhere, but I'm not going to basically mention where it is. I'm not going to link it. I don't basically, want to draw all that much attention to it now that the movie has basically been made. What I basically saw in this franchise is that when Mike starts his week at Freddy's, everything seems normal on the first night. The first couple of nights are relatively normal, and that lures Mike into a false sense of security. And this is exactly how it happens in the movie. In fact, it's almost shot for shot how I would have planned it out. In my version, Mike basically is hanging out in the security guard, not really taking the job all that seriously, when he hears something out in the restaurant and sees something on one of the security cameras, so he takes up the flashlight and goes to investigate. The same thing happens in this live-action movie, and when Mike gets out to the main area, he sees something moving behind the curtains. In my version, it's the curtain to Pirate Cove, where Foxy is, but in the actual theatrical movie version, it's the curtain on the main stage where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica are, and effectively when Mike pulls back the curtain in both versions, he gets startled by the sight of the animatronic character just standing there with dead eyes. In my version, he was looking at Foxy, but in this version, he's looking at Bonnie. And, well, I guess you could say that I kind of appreciated that. And then, and then the next day, once Mike's shift is over, the point is that Mike, since this job is so uneventful for him, he ends up falling asleep on the job. Now, the thing that you need to know about Mike is that he sleeps with a poster of Nebraska above his bed, and he sleeps with a cassette tape of nature sounds. And the reason that he does this is because I don't honestly think that it helps him sleep. I think that he does this because he's trying to use dream theory to reach forgotten memories, repressed memories of his past, because according to the book he's reading, nobody ever truly forgets everything. They remember everything down to the last detail, and they need stimulus in order to bring those memories out. And what he does is, while he's asleep at Freddy's, he has a dream about being in Nebraska with his mom and dad back when he was a kid, and the day that his younger brother, Garrett, got taken. Yep, apparently he and Abby had a brother. Abby probably wasn't even born yet at this point. They had a brother named Garrett, and when Mom, Dad, and Mike and Garrett went on a little camping trip out in Nebraska, the parents told Mike to watch Garrett, so they were playing around. Garrett was playing with a toy plane. Mike was chasing after a frisbee. The next thing he knows, Garrett is put in the back of somebody's car, and the guy drives off with Garrett. And Mike feels guilty about that and is trying to find out who it was that took his younger brother. However, this time, as he has the dream at Freddy's, something new happens, where 5 children that weren't there suddenly appear in his dream, and Mike basically says, this wasn't a part of it, this has changed. Do you guys know who took my brother? And so he tries to get them to reveal who it was that took his brother. Don't know exactly why he thinks these kids would know, but the kids end up scattering and running away from him, and he ends up running after the kid with blonde hair. Keep that in mind, because, well, let's just get it right to it. The leader of the kids is one kid with blonde hair. There's another kid wearing a kind of orangish brown shirt with a little top hat. There's another kid that's basically wearing bunny ears. There's a little girl with blonde hair, and then finally there's this little ginger kid wearing an orange shirt with a pirate hook. So, if you can't figure out who these characters are, well, that's tough luck on you. Anyway, he wakes up and he ends up going home. He ends up basically meeting with the babysitter that he basically got to watch Abby all night long, an apparent friend of his, and, well, he basically reprieves her and pretty much lets her go home for the day, but a problem happens when, in the next scene, we actually find out that this friend of his, the babysitter that's been watching Abby for him, she's actually a no-good fink. She and her brother are actually working for Aunt Jane, and they're meeting her and her lawyer at a diner, and they're basically discussing that she hasn't been keeping her end of the bargain, because apparently Aunt Jane hired this person as a mole to infiltrate Mike's life, earn his trust, and then find any kind of evidence of criminal negligence or criminal abuse that or child abuse that she can use in order to basically get custody of Abby away from Mike. And honestly, it's just so horrible. The girl that's basically been babysitting, she is clearly uncomfortable by this, because it's clear that she's actually grown fond of both Mike and Abby throughout her time spent with them, and she literally even talks about how sweet Abby is and how Mike really just sleeps a lot and how hard he's trying, and really just he's not doing any of the things that his aunt wants him to be doing, because she needs so badly to get that welfare check from the government. So anyway, out of nowhere, her brother decides, why don't we try killing him? If you want this kid so bad, let's just kill Mike, and then she'll have to go to you because you're next of kin. But the problem is that Aunt Viv, I think she basically thinks that maybe she'd immediately be suspect of that. And remember how I mentioned that the lawyer was completely worthless? He's just sitting in the diner listening to all this, and even makes comments how, you know what, I shouldn't be listening to any of this. In fact, I shouldn't even be here for this, because, literally speaking, they're basically implicating themselves, and by him being there, he's basically an accessory to all of this. An accessory to conspiracy, so... Anyway, they come to a decision that Mike has this new job as a security guard, and his job is to keep people out and keep the place safe and tidy. So the brother gets the idea, let's go over there with a few friends and toss the place. Well, after he clocks out for his shift, we'll break in, we'll smash everything that looks valuable, and he'll lose the job, and it basically will make it look like he's negligent. That way, basically, now that he's lost his job, that'll be another thing that you can use against him in the custody battle. So, anyway, it just shows how deplorable that this woman is. The fact that this is her nephew and her niece, and it's like, I don't know if she's related to them by the father or their mother, or maybe she's just related to them by marriage, but the fact that she's this irredeemably cruel, it just doesn't really work, I think. I don't necessarily believe that this character is a real thing. It's just something that exists for the purposes of facilitating the plot, and I honestly don't think that this subplot is even necessary. I honestly think that a young man who lost both of his parents and is now responsible for his younger sister, that in and of itself is already a relatable enough plot, because people are struggling even without that kind of thing. I mean, an episode of House did this exact same plot nearly 15 years ago at this point, so... And the ironic thing is that the kid who now has to take care of his two younger siblings is also working at a Chuck E. Cheese-esque pizza establishment. Huh. The more things change, the more they stay the same, am I right? The only thing that is even remotely amusing about this entire diner scene is that they got Matt Pat to cameo in this movie. Yep, the rumors are true. Matt Pat has a cameo in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie where he is the friendly waiter that tries to give them menus at the diner, and they're basically saying, oh, we're not eating. And it was like, oh, you definitely want to eat. Lunch is the most important meal of the day. They're like, that's breakfast. Breakfast is just a theory. They even have him say that's just a theory. So, seeing Matt Pat and realizing, holy crap, that's him! It did make me smile. And basically, in order to put some news out there, it's like, Markiplier, unfortunately, doesn't have a cameo in the movie. I honestly didn't expect him to appear in the flesh. I thought he was going to have a voice cameo. I honestly thought that they were going to have him be the voice of Phone Guy. Like, if Phone Guy actually made it into the movie, where if Mike would watch recordings or listen to recordings of the previous guard, I honestly thought that would be, hello, I wanted to leave a message for you to kind of let you know, what's going on here. Welcome to your new career as a security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Hello, I'm Markiplier. Welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's. God, that's probably a terrible impression, but I just find it so weird. Like, it's not that they didn't want to have Markiplier in the movie. I'm told that there was a scheduling conflict. Apparently, Markiplier is off doing his own adaptation, his own movie. Yeah, apparently Markiplier is making a movie based on Iron Lung. I honestly thought that the scheduling conflict was happening because this movie was made while he was making Markiplier in space, but like I said, this movie has been in production hell for so damn long. You don't really know what project is being worked on at what point. But anyways, so let's see. Mike goes back to Freddy's for his second shift there, and this time he takes the poster of Nebraska and the little Walkman that he has, the nature sounds, and some headphones with him, because he's intending to sleep while at Freddy's. He even takes his bottle of prescription sleeping pills with him. Yeah, that's going to be important, so anyway, Mike takes the pills and he goes to sleep while at Freddy's. The problem is that this is the night where the animatronics start getting more active. You basically get a shot of Pirate's Cove and you see that Foxy isn't there. You get shots of Foxy's shadow moving throughout the restaurant, coming closer to the security office. Suddenly, all the lights and all the speakers in the office start going haywire, and that startles Mike. It wakes him up, and he remembers what Matthew Lillard told him. If the electricity starts doing that weird thing, just shut it down and then turn it back on. Do a quick reboot. The thing about it is, in his panic, Mike doesn't notice that Foxy is standing right outside the door, but once the power comes back on, Foxy is gone. He goes back to the stage. Weird how every single time these animatronics move, there's like this heavy thudding footstep, and they move so slowly, and yet Foxy can pull off a stunt like that. He can immediately just teleport back to the stage. Anyway, here comes one of the things that I'm most divided on when it comes to this movie. Enter Vanessa. A policewoman is knocking on the front door of the establishment, and Mike has to go and let her in. Apparently, she's Officer Vanessa, a patrol cop, and Freddy's has basically been on her beat for the last few years. And she actually has a history of the franchise. She grew up in the 80s, because I'm pretty sure that this must take place in the 90s or something. Because there's no sign of cell phones or any modern-day technology. Everybody is actually using landline phones, headphones, things like that. All the cars look old-time, and there's no flat-screen TVs. The point is that she basically loved Freddy's and the characters as a little girl, but now she basically... Well, let's face it, Vanessa is only there to give exposition about what Mike needs to know. And this is one of the things that I'm a bit more apprehensive about, because I feel like Mike is given the answers way too easily. Alright. So, let me collect my thoughts for a moment here. I forgot to mention that Mike actually does have a second dream where he's back in the forest, he sees Garrett get taken, the 5 kids pop up, they basically all run away from him again. This time he runs after the kid with the pirate hook. The problem is, once he catches up with the pirate hook kid, the kid slashes his hook at him, cuts Mike in the forearm, and then Mike sees him bleeding from his eyes, and that's what causes him to wake up. So, the problem is, when he goes to let Vanessa into the restaurant to meet her at the door, she points out that he actually is bleeding, so he gets cut in his dream, and now he's cut for real. You know, I have a feeling that they took the whole Five Nights at Freddy's thing a little too seriously, because that's a completely different Freddy that you're dealing with there. So why was I so apprehensive about Vanessa being in this movie? Honestly, my idea for a Fnaf franchise is that the mystery surrounding what happened at Freddy's is the most appealing part of the entire franchise, and I wanted the movies to replicate that feeling with only giving the audience enough clues to keep them interested and always having more information to reveal later in the stories. And here's where I'm going to start talking a little bit about the Silver Eyes and the point where I realized that a FNAF movie might not be the best idea, or at least they probably don't have the best idea when it comes to making a FNAF movie, because it seems to me that as the franchise has gone on and Scott has a more clear idea of what he wanted to happen in the series, he wants to basically go back to the beginning of the franchise and retcon certain events to happen in order to better establish what would happen later. The problem is that I don't really care for that. I don't think that it's all that necessary. And Vanessa is one of those things. Another thing is the film's quasi-main antagonist, but we'll get to him later on. So why am I so apprehensive about Vanessa being in this movie? Because this movie, for want of a better purpose, is based on the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. It's just one Freddy's location. The only animatronics are the 5 that you see in that game. There's Freddy, Foxy, Chica, Bonnie, and Golden Freddy. But we'll get to him later. So, Vanessa, on the other hand, her character wasn't introduced until FNAF Security Breach, as in the most recent FNAF game that came out, what was that, 2 years ago at this point? Technically, her character was introduced back in FNAF Help Wanted, but I don't really feel like talking all that much about that. The point is that it feels like Vanessa is this character that sort of came out of nowhere in the franchise, but now Scott really wants to basically kind of really exemplify her importance in the franchise to the point where he wants to rewrite history and make it seem like, oh, Vanessa has been there the entire time. And like, no, she clearly hasn't been. So she really wasn't even supposed to be involved in this franchise until more than 30 years after this point, because that's apparently the timeline that Five Nights at Freddy's is working with. Anyway, the point... So she shows up, she basically tells him that the security guards that come to this job usually quit because the things happened at the restaurant, and eventually you're not going to be able to take it anymore. So you're going to want to get out of here and stay as far away from here as you can. And basically, she's just there to pretty much lay the groundwork that back in the 80s, 5 children went missing and their bodies were never found. And, well, it's all tied up with Freddy's. That's why the place got shut down and why the reputation is basically ruined. Like I said before I had to go back and talk about the dream, I think that Mike is given all this information too easily, because this is where it deviates away from my idea of how this movie should have been handled, because, like I said, the first few nights were supposed to be relatively uneventful, harmless, but I think by the end of the second night, Mike is supposed to realize that something is definitely up with the animatronics this time. They are being incredibly aggressive. And then, during the day, after that second shift, Mike goes to investigate. He goes to the library, he goes to the newspaper archives. That's how he's supposed to find out about the missing children's incident. That's how he's supposed to get the sense that, okay, something has definitely happened at this place, and now the animatronics are acting a bit wonky. And, well, Vanessa even basically plainly spells it out for me in the movie. You didn't do your homework before accepting this job. And it's like, yeah, that, like I said, he has you to give him the exposition on what he needs to know in this movie, so what's even the point of him going to search for answers when you're going to show up with all the answers? No problem. Anyway, Mike finishes up his shift, Vanessa leaves and whatnot. We definitely see Mike locking the place up, but we also see the babysitter's brother watching him leave, and she basically, he calls her on a nearby phone and basically says, okay, he's leaving. As soon as he gets back to his place, you come over here with the guys, we'll toss this place. So, Mike goes home, the babysitter joins up with two other guys, they drive on out to Freddy's, and her brother and the two guys, they go in, they prepare to smash everything and swipe anything that's valuable. She stays out in the car, and you can sense where this is going to go. As they're smashing things up and breaking the place, the animatronics come to life and start hunting them down one by one, and it's actually a pretty amusing scene. We definitely see Chica cornering one guy in the kitchen and Mr. Cupcake basically chewing the guy's face off. We see the older guy, the fat guy with the beard. He's running for his life after he witnesses this. He goes and hides in a storage closet where Bonnie is actually waiting for him, and he actually can't get out of the storage closet. That was a really good reference, because those are both references to the game. Chica goes into the kitchen, Bonnie is in one of the storage closets on the west side of the restaurant. Then the brother, he basically is witnessing all this. He tries to get out of the exit door that's right next to the security office, and that's when Foxy comes after him, and you see Foxy rushing towards him, kind of like how it is in the game. Foxy running down the hallways. And then, of course, the sister, she gets tired of waiting for them to finish up in there, so she goes inside to look for them, where she sees the kid from Mike's dream, the one with the top hat. He's basically saying, follow me. And he's leading her into the back rooms where all the spare animatronic suits are, and he leads her right to the Freddy animatronic, because that kid's ghost is Freddy. And he basically is playing hide-and-seek with her, playing colder and warmer. He's like, try and find me. And as she gets closer to the Freddy costume, she hears him say, warmer, warmer, warmer. She basically stands on a chair to basically try and look into Freddy's mouth to see if the kid is hiding inside the suit. She tries to reach in when suddenly the kid's hand reaches out, grabs her, and pulls her into Freddy's mouth. It looks kind of comical because we only see the shadow. We see her get pulled halfway in, and then Freddy bites down on her, completely cutting her in half. It's kind of goofy, but I think the thing that made up for it is that as I'm in the theaters, I definitely had some fans of the Fnaf franchise in the theater with me. They were sitting in the row behind me, and after she gets bitten in half, I heard them say, was that the bite of 87? I actually laughed at that, and I gave them a little round of applause at that. That's what I like. I like it when theaters can have a bit of a fun experience. Was it the bite of 87? Anyways, so that situation has ultimately gone tits up, and we cut back to Mike at his place. He's basically looking after Abby because it's daytime. Vanessa shows up, and, well, apparently, Vanessa basically, is there to tell him that Freddy's got broken into, which honestly kind of surprised me at this point, because we all know what Fazbear Entertainment is in the games, and we definitely know that this isn't the kind of thing that they would allow to get out, you know? Literally, when you play the first FNAF game, they basically say that in the event that should anything happen to you, a missing persons report will be filed 90 days after your disappearance, or until long enough for management to have changed the carpets and sterilized the entire work area to basically remove any trace of wrongdoing that can be connected back to FNAF Entertainment. So, I honestly expected that this whole break-in was going to be nothing more than a vehicle to get these characters killed, and that by the time that Mike came back to work the next day, everything was going to be in completely pristine condition, as if there had been no break-in at all. As in, the forces that be behind this place have already come in, cleaned the floors, cleaned everything up, and just replaced all the stuff that these guys broke. So, anyhow, she basically points out that she found his bottle of sleeping medication at the restaurant and basically says, you can't be sleeping on the job while you're at Freddy's. If you're too out of it to remember to lock a single door, then that's basically criminal negligence, and I'm going to have to report you for it. And so, she and Mike go for a walk. They basically talk about things. They basically kind of have a heart-to-heart. Mike explains that what happened to their parents. And this is one of the things that I honestly don't care for, because they basically say that the mom died a while back, and apparently the dad couldn't take it. The dad just sort of checked out and stopped trying. They basically imply that the dad ran away, and that kind of pisses me off, because it's this story would be better if both parents were dead. I mean, you could have one of them commit suicide. I honestly don't care which, but the thing that bothers me is the idea that their mom dies and the dad falls to pieces, because that's just another unnecessary shot from Hollywood, basically trying to make the claim that men are just bad fathers. It's just another bad father there. The idea that basically, this guy was so selfish after his wife died that he just completely abandoned his kids, that kind of shit pisses me off. It honestly would have been better if both of them had been killed in some kind of car accident or something. Because, for the way that you look at it is that in the situation, Mom isn't there because she was a victim of circumstance. She died of some kind of disease or something, but Dad is not there because he chose to not be there. That pisses me the fuck off. Anyway, Vanessa tells Mike to basically not take any more sleeping pills and not basically sleep on the job at Freddy's anymore. But Mike is going to do it anyway because he's convinced that sleeping at Freddy's and getting in contact with those ghosts is the key that he needs to finding his brother's killer. And this is one of the things that I honestly don't necessarily get about Mike, because they make him absolutely obsessed with finding his brother's killer, but I don't necessarily know why. I mean, sure, he wants the closure, but I honestly don't see any sort of benefit from him actually knowing, because the guy who did it is definitely long gone at this point, if it weren't for the fact that this movie is what it is. So, what would remembering him and what would knowing who he was actually change anything? It's not like you're gonna have a memory of his face, but you're not going to know his name. You're not going to know where he lives, where he is. How are you going to find this guy, huh? So anyway, I think that a whole lot of unnecessary bullshit happens during the day that, quite frankly, I don't remember, don't really care about. Mike basically is trying to call the babysitter, but as we, the audience, know, she's dead, and now he has nobody to watch his sister while he's working, so he basically decides, I gotta take you with me. So they drive over to Freddy's. He basically tells her, I'm gonna work and you're gonna sleep, okay? So they go in. The place is basically all messed up because, like, the guys trashed it and whatnot. He basically takes her to the office and tells her under no circumstances are you to leave this office. And she sets up a kind of bed fort like she has in her room. And she kind of basically goes to sleep under there. And Mike gets to work watching the monitors for a little bit. Then he goes out into the main hall and actually cleans up a lot of the glass. He mops the floors. He gets the place looking nice again. And I actually kind of like this because something like this actually does happen in my idea for a FNAF movie, just not FNAF 1. It actually happens in FNAF 2. So, but anyways, he gets the place cleaned up. It's about 4 a.m., so then he goes back to the office to take a pill, put on his headphones, and try and fall asleep to get into the dreamscape again. However, while he's sleeping, one of the ghosts actually starts reaching out to Abby and trying to wake her up. In the dream, this time the kids aren't running away from him. Instead, it's just the blonde kid sitting on the ground drawing something with a stick in the dirt, and Mike just basically kind of sits down behind him and talks to him instead of chasing after him, you know? Mike basically comes to the realization that you kids, you're the kids who went missing back in the 80s, right? And he basically is like, the guy who killed you. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it is that I can communicate with you guys, but I think you can help me. I think that you guys can help me find the guy who killed my brother. At which point, the blonde kid stops drawing in the dirt and turns around and looks at him and says, "What will you give us if I reveal this information? If I show you the man who did it?" And Mike is like, "Everything. I'll give you anything you want." It's at that point that the kid disappears, and the only thing left is the drawing that he made in the dirt with the stick, and it's a drawing of a rabbit man. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the ghost has basically woken up Abby and basically kind of like tries to get her to follow him. And Abby basically like goes with the ghost. Mike hears her scream and he wakes up. He goes out into the main dining area where he sees all the animatronic characters surrounding Abby and she's screaming, and so he rushes in to try and defend her, picking up a chair ready to fight the animatronic characters off, and Freddy just immediately turns around and is getting ready to kill him. And Mike is basically kind of holding him off with the chair, at which point Abby stops Freddy. Yep. This is the point where the movie takes a really unsatisfying turn, because it basically delves into the realm of fan fiction at this point. Yeah, she stops Freddy, and she reveals that the reason that she was screaming is because the animatronic characters were tickling her. Yep. Apparently she has made friends with all the animatronics. And because of the fact that she stops Freddy from killing Mike, the other animatronics calm down and they just kind of accept him. As in, they're not going to kill him. So, why do I say that this is unsatisfying, and why do I say that it's nosediving into the realm of fan fiction? Well, let me just basically put it this way. I honestly think one of the appeals of the Fnaf franchise is that you actually can relate somewhat to the monsters. The animatronic characters really are sympathetic enough to where you can honestly get a sense that these characters are really just scared children who are looking for the guy who killed them. They don't really mean any real harm. It's just that they don't know who did it. They can't recognize the guy who killed them, so they can't. So sometimes people, unfortunate victims, get in their way. It really. I've seen countless bits of fan art and fan fiction that basically try to present the animatronic characters as being gentle, especially towards children, because they have no reason to kill children, and so you kind of get the sense that instead of being mindless killers, these characters are really just frightened children who are lashing out because they're looking for the guy who killed them. The problem is that the franchise has reminded us time and time again that regardless of how sympathetic these animatronic characters can be or have been, we can't necessarily forget or forgive what they have done. These things are killing machines, and later on the series literally retconned it to where the animatronics themselves were designed to be killing machines. So it all feels kind of manipulative, and like I said, based on how this movie is going to go, it feels like the movie is going to try and have its cake and eat it too. Anyways, so Mike is basically astonished at the fact that the animatronics are indeed alive, and they want to play with Abby. However, it's now 6 a.m. and they have to get going, and Mike is starting to piece together what all this actually means. So, while he's basically, waiting for his next night shift, he's talking to Abby about the animatronic characters, as well as all the drawings that Abby has. One of the running themes of the movie is that Abby doesn't really talk all that much. Instead, she draws pictures in order to cope with her trauma, and Mike realizes that she's been drawing pictures that are related to the events of this movie. She's been drawing pictures of the ghost children that he's been seeing in his dreams, and she's even drawn a picture of Garrett being taken away, which is odd because she wasn't even born at the time that happened, and her parents never told her about it. So Mike goes to ask her about it, and he asks her if the ghost children, the animatronics, told her about this, and what it is that they know about it. She says that they just want to play, and they don't mean any harm, and so I honestly don't really remember all that much that happens after that point. Mike gets the idea that because the ghost children don't really like him, they keep running away from him while in the dream, that they're not going to reveal the information that he's looking for to him, but because they like Abby, they might be willing to talk to her. So he wants to take her back to Freddy's that night and basically try and get more information out of her. Get her to get more information out of them. Vanessa shows up during the shift, and basically at this point, Vanessa is actually kind of upset at the fact that Mike is bringing Abby to the restaurant because she knows that it's not safe for her to be there. But the thing about it is she just kind of goes along with it at this point because Mike is ultimately kind of upset that she didn't reveal the true nature of the animatronics to him, the fact that they're possessed by the ghosts of dead children. And honestly, this is the point where the movie gets into its most fan-fiction-y moment, the fact that apparently the animatronic characters want to build a fort with Abby, and they basically get Mike and Vanessa to help. They end up turning over all the tables and making a gigantic fort, and they all basically just kind of hang out under the fort for a little bit. It's so friggin' weird seeing the characters of Five Nights at Freddy's do this, because it's like, I've seen fan art of this kind of stuff happening, but it never happened in the games, because In the games, you're too busy trying to survive these things. Anyway, so Mike goes to confront Vanessa over the fact that she didn't warn him that the animatronics were possessed by the children, and meanwhile, she's basically acting really kind of pissed off at him for bringing Abby here because she knows how dangerous it is, and she literally tells him, you ever bring... crap, I forgot about one thing. She even reveals how dangerous the spring lock contraptions are when they find an old spring lock suit in the back rooms where they're looking for picnic table supplies in order to finish building the fort and whatnot. So she basically points out that, like, the spring locks, if they fail, they'll basically skewer a human being, and Mike is basically like, why didn't you tell me about that sooner? What if Abby had come back here and stumbled onto that thing? Why is it that you're the one who brought her here, Mike, not me? So, anyways, back out on the main dancing area, Freddie and Bonnie are singing a song for Abby, and Bonnie is trying to play on his guitar. Abby gets up on the stage and strums Bonnie's guitar, but earlier in the movie basically established that whenever the guitar is strummed, electric sparks shoot out and it causes the band to short circuit. So when Abby does it, she gets electrocuted, and it seems like a moment that's gonna, like, Abby is in danger, maybe she's gonna die, maybe the animatronics are gonna freak out, but instead Vanessa revives her, and she basically orders them to take the rest of the night off, to go home, to take care of her. And she basically makes it clear to Mike on no uncertain terms, if he ever brings Abby back to this place, she will shoot him. So basically just take her back home and don't come back. So right, so we're heading into the climax of the movie now, where Mike basically is convinced that these ghosts are the key to finding what happened to his long-lost brother, his brother's killer, but he knows he can't take Abby there because he can't risk her life, and he's got nobody who can watch her during his night shift, which ultimately doesn't matter at this point. He actually needs somebody to watch her during the day, because he's convinced that he needs to go and check out Freddy's during the daytime. So, he ends up calling Aunt Jane. He ends up calling her, bringing her over to the house, asking her to watch Abby, and Abby just completely doesn't want anything to do with this. She tells Mike that she hates him because she doesn't want to go with Aunt Jane and whatnot, and then she goes to lock herself in her room, and he basically tells Aunt Jane to basically watch her for a few hours. He'll be back, but Jane basically says, we're going to have a serious conversation when you do get back. Mike goes and refills his sleeping pill subscription. He goes to Freddy's. He immediately goes into the office and takes the pills to fall asleep so that he can basically go back into the dream. But the dream is different this time. The dream now has a happy ending where Garrett isn't taken. Instead, he basically is in the woods camping with his mom and his dad. They're having a nice picnic lunch together, and Mike is questioning why this is happening. The ghosts then reveal themselves that this is what you wanted. And basically it's like, you want to change the past. You want to save him. You want to have a happy ending. If you give us what we want, you can have this dream every single night. You can be with your brother, your mother, and your father again. The problem is that Mike doesn't know what it is that they want, so he asks them, what do you want? And the blonde kid says, we want Abby. Isn't it worth the trade? And then suddenly, the memory, the dream versions of Garrett, his mom, and his dad basically are saying, it's a fair trade, Mike. You deserve this. you know that you're not fit to take care of her. It's time to let her go. And so Mike's defenses are broken down, and he agrees, yes, I want this. You can take Abby. But then he immediately tries to take it back. He's realizing that it's a mistake. He's like, no, this is wrong. I made a mistake. You can't take Abby. No. And then the dream changes. The picnic table disappears. His mom, his dad, his brother, they're all gone. The kids are all disappeared as well. And Mike is basically saying, I said no. I changed my mind. You stay away from Abby. Then suddenly, all the kids start rushing past him, coming at him from various angles, clawing at him and cutting him every single time they pass. And like earlier in the movie, the slashes that he takes in the dream affect him in real life. He eventually is able to wake up as he realizes that, oh shit, the animatronics are coming after me now. He tries to get out through the back door, only to get cornered by Foxy, and he blacks out. This is another portion of the movie that honestly doesn't get explained, and I honestly don't think it's all that necessary, because apparently in this movie, somewhere in the back rooms, there's this kind of Saw-esque chair and a Saw-esque Freddy mask. He's basically strapped down in the chair, and the mask has all these spinning blades underneath it, and it's gradually moving toward his face. You basically watch the film theory for the Fnaf movie. Matt Pat basically theorizes that this is going to be some kind of remnant extractor. I honestly thought that it was going to be some kind of Saw-esque Springtrap game. So, anyway, the thing about it is that Mike manages to get himself free and gets out of the chair before he gets his face all cut up. But the fact that that portion of the movie is never properly explained, it honestly kind of ticks me off. So, the problem is that Mike is bleeding profusely now, and he needs to get out of there. So, when Mike actually wakes up, he's actually being taken care of by Vanessa. Apparently, she brought him to some kind of police equipment station. I have no idea what those places are. And she's basically patching up his wounds. Mike basically chastises her, basically saying, you knew the entire time, you knew how dangerous those things were, and you didn't even warn me. And Vanessa just basically bears all that she knows about the animatronics. She knows what they've done, what they're going to do, and she basically explains that the reason that they want Abby so much is because they're going to try and make her like them, into a ghost, or an animatronic like them. Meanwhile, Abby is basically just sulking in her room while Aunt Jane is watching TV out in the living room, and suddenly, Golden Freddy is there in the house. And, well, when Abby finally comes out of the room, she sees Golden Freddy, and the blonde-haired ghost kid appears to her and says, come on, Abby, let's go. It's time to play. And he takes her with him back to Freddy's. We get one brief glimpse of Aunt Jane's dead body on the floor, but Golden Freddy says, silly Aunt Jane, she fell asleep. And that's basically the best that we're going to get about her. And there's this really weird and kind of unnecessary scene with Golden Freddy Golden Freddy and Abby getting a cab all the way back to Fazbear's. The thing about it is, when they get to Fazbear's, Abby goes inside the building by herself, and Golden Freddy disappears because he's a ghost. He's never really had a physical form. So it kind of makes me wonder, how was he able to physically interact with the taxi cab? Because the cab does shift in weight when Golden Freddy climbs into the back seat. So it's like, what the heck? Anyway, so Vanessa basically is kind of like revealing her history with the Fazbear franchise. The idea that the reason that she knows all of what's going on is because back with the kids who went missing, the guys, the police shut Freddy's down. They tore it apart. They searched top to bottom, but they couldn't find the bodies. But Vanessa reveals that she knew what happened to the bodies. It's not just their spirits that are inside the suits. Their bodies are stuffed in there as well. And the reason that she knows about this is because she reveals the man behind the slaughter, William Afton, the guy in the golden bunny suit. He's her father. Yeah. Basically a surprise to no one. It should be at this point. So, Mike basically says that he's not going to let them take his sister. He's got to go there and he's got to stop them. So, Vanessa ends up arming Mike with a whole bunch of tasers and cattle prods because the electricity will help basically fight them off. But she warns Mike that he's not just going up against the animatronics anymore. Now that Mike she shows him a picture of Michael Afton in the golden Bonnie suit and a picture of her as a little girl. She's also holding the toy airplane that Garrett had on the day that he was taken, thus implying that this is the guy who kidnapped his brother, and after he killed him, he gave his toy plane to Vanessa. And so Mike is basically pissed off at Vanessa. Is like, did you know? The entire time, did you know? So, anyway, she says that she's not going to come with him because if Afton is there, she won't be any good to help them because she's too terrified of her father, apparently. So anyways, Mike goes to Freddy's, and at this point, Freddy and Bonnie are performing on stage. Meanwhile, Chica is leading Abby into the back rooms. Mike tries to follow them, but he has to basically sneak past Freddy and Bonnie. And this is honestly one of the things that I dislike about the movie. The fact is that the animatronic characters are so good in how expressive they are. You can definitely get the sense of what the animatronic characters are thinking at the time. You can tell when they are mad, you can tell when they are neutral, you can even tell when they are a bit happy. But that honestly doesn't work for the Fnaf franchise because I honestly think that one of the scariest parts about the first game is just how unexpressive the animatronic characters are. They constantly give you this dead-eyed glare throughout the entire game that doesn't really change all that much. It doesn't really convey what they are thinking, but it honestly is scarier that way. Seeing Freddy with his eyebrows locked in a scowling position in this movie, it just doesn't really feel right. Anyways, Mike manages to take out both Freddy and Bonnie by flooding the stage with water and then shocking them with a taser. And then he goes into the back room where Chica is currently trying to stuff Abby into that abandoned springlock suit in an attempt to kill her, and Mike manages to disable Chica with a stun gun as well. And then he tries to get her out of there. The problem is that here comes Foxy. And the worst part about it is that Mr. Cupcake comes along and bites Mike's leg and basically kind of hobbles him. Abby tries to run away, and Mike has to fight off the Cupcake with the cattle prod. But now it's a bit too late because Foxy is basically chasing down Abby in a scene that is literally right out of FNAF Silver Eyes. That kind of irritates me because I honestly don't think that Silver Eyes really is all that good. Now let's talk about Silver Eyes for a moment. One of the things that made me the most hesitant about a FNAF movie was the worry that the FNAF movie was going to try and model itself after the Silver Eyes book trilogy. I gotta say, I only ever bothered reading the Silver Eyes because it was so disappointing that there was no way the Twisted Ones or the Fourth Closet could ever salvage it. Why? Because it represents a fundamental problem with adapting the story of Fnaf. You're trying to do too much at once. The first book literally should have just been Fnaf 1, except they mix in both Fnaf 1 and Fnaf 3. And that's just... it's so freaking irritating. And the worst part about it is, this movie literally does the same thing. So, here's honestly one of the more disappointing facts. As Mike is trying to catch up with Abby to protect her from Foxy, who should finally show up but the man behind the slaughter himself, William Afton, dressed in the gold Bonnie suit. And it's clear that the golden Bonnie suit has basically had some decrepit decomposition already going on. It looks like it's got some holes in it, it's dirty and whatnot. So, at least the movie has that going for it. It's not exactly Springtrap yet, but for want of a better term, it's Springtrap, and he's brandishing a knife coming out of the corridors. Mike tries to basically use the taser on him, but because he's not an animatronic, he easily just rips the tasers away and then just punches Mike across the room. And, unfortunately, he has to start talking. Yeah. Okay, so I basically made it clear that based on Matthew Lillard's filmography, it was already a foredrawn conclusion who he was going to play when he was cast in this movie. So yeah, Matthew Lillard is William Afton. And apparently the character that he was earlier in the movie was basically just him acting under a false identity so that he could hide in plain sight, kind of like how it was in the Silver Eyes. But honestly, it's just so friggin' disappointing because the movie is literally only a few minutes from being over, and yet the film's chief antagonist has only just showed up. You see, this is the problem that I have when you're trying to adapt both FNAF 1 and FNAF 3 at the same time, because Springtrap doesn't fit in the establishment of this story. Sure, he is a crucial part of this story, but he's not a focus of it. And unfortunately, this movie wanted to make him into a focus of it when he honestly can't be. He just gets regulated to the last few minutes of the movie, and it's at this point, it's like, oh, the movie finally remembered that the character was actually in this. At friggin' the 1 hour and 40 minute mark. Anyways, Anyway, Abby is hiding from Foxy in the ball pit, and Foxy is close to finding her. We hear Foxy get electrocuted, and then somebody grabs Abby and pulls her out of the ball pit, revealed to be Vanessa, basically saying that, I'm going to get you out of here, and then I'm going to go help your brother. So she tries to get Abby to a safe location, at which point they come across Springtrap in the main atrium, and basically he's just beating the crap out of Mike, because he basically... the suit makes him strong, and he's taunting Mike. It's like, you really couldn't leave it alone, could you, Mr. Mike Schmidt? Well, this is just perfect, because I killed your brother, now I'm gonna kill you. That's what you call symmetry. He actually hits Mike in the face so hard that it kind of knocks Mike out for a bit, at which point he basically uses some kind of power that brings the other animatronics back to life, makes them wake up, makes them recover from the electric shock that Mike gave them, even the friggin' cupcake. So, apparently Vanessa describes that Afton has some kind of control over the other characters, because apparently, even though they know the Golden Rabbit had something to do with their deaths, they don't know he's the one who killed them, which kind of conflicts with things that were said earlier in the movie. You see how I'm basically getting get the impression that this movie is the amalgam of several rejected scripts that somehow got mixed together. It doesn't actually make sense. But anyways, Afton is getting ready to kill Mike, but Vanessa pulls a gun on him, basically saying to leave them alone. At which point, Afton basically starts taunting her, saying that, I know that you're not going to shoot me, Vanessa. She does try to shoot him, but the suit protects him, and he rushes towards her with the knife and actually grabs her by the throat. And he actually says something weird, like, You had one job to do, to keep him in the dark, to not let him ask any questions, and if he got too close, kill him if you have to. This is honestly one of the only hints that we get in the movie that Vanessa was actually in on it from the get-go, that she's actually been Afton's accomplice to all of this. I don't know if they're going to explore that in the sequel, because I think we're supposed to sympathize with Vanessa's character in this movie. But anyways, Afton stabs her in the stomach. It's at this point that Abby gets the idea that she can get the animatronics to turn on Afton if she reveals that he's the one who killed them. So she draws a picture of the golden rabbit and all the ghost kids, the golden rabbit with a bloody knife in his hand, and all them being dead, surrounded by him, and puts it on the wall. And suddenly, that makes it click in the animatronics' brains that, hey, this is the guy who killed us. So they start closing in on him, and they surround him, and it's honestly one of the worst scenes of the movie. You would think that this would be the most exciting, but Afton is just screaming at them, basically saying, I made you. You are all horrible, ugly, filthy little beasts. I made you. And then suddenly the cupcake attacks him. It bites him in the side. He pulls it away, and you realize that the only reason that it bit him in the side is to basically get an inside view of the spring lock mechanisms inside the suit. It creates a hole that we can see so that we can watch the spring locks begin to fail and start digging into his flesh. So yeah, it's the scene where he basically gets trapped in the spring lock suit and basically becomes Springtrap. And honestly, it's kind of weak considering that he still has enough motor control over his bloodied and basically lacerated body to take the golden Bonnie mask and put it back on, saying, I always come back. Yeah, no offense to Matthew Lillard, but you're just not William Afton, guy. You can't be William Afton. Based on how much William Afton has been built up in our minds, there's no way that friggin' Shaggy from Scooby-Doo is going to be William Afton. And what's even weird is that the restaurant starts coming apart as Mike and Abby help get Vanessa to safety, and we get this weird scene of the 4 animatronic characters dragging Springtrap off towards the back room. It's kind of reminiscent of that scene from Batman Returns, where after the Penguin is dead, all the Emperor Penguins come out and just kind of start dragging his body into the water. It kind of looks exactly like that. Anyways, the next day, the movie kind of concludes with Abby and Michael having been changed for the better in this experience because, for the one thing, Abby, her doctor, basically says that she's making improvements. She's smiling, she's happy, she's communicating with the other children, and she basically tells Mike to keep up the good work, and it looks like they have a bright future together. Abby is actually eating now because that was actually a subplot throughout the movie. She basically was so traumatized by the death of her parents that she didn't want to eat all that much, but now she clearly wants spaghetti for dinner. However, they make a stop at the hospital basically to visit Vanessa. She's alive, but she's in a comatose state and she's hooked up to a respirator. Mike basically wants to thank her for saving him and his sister and hopes that she comes out of it. I don't know if... I really hope that she comes back in the sequel And I wonder what kind of role she's going to play, because I've got thoughts on the Fnaf franchise that I'll explain once the spoiler is done. The problem is that it doesn't actually look all that good for Vanessa being a protagonistic, helpful character. She might actually be a villain. So keep that in mind. The final scene is of Mike and Abby having dinner together in the kitchen. Abby has a drawing of her friends, of basically her, Mike, Vanessa, and the 4 Freddy's animatronic characters lying on the floor in their fort that they made at Freddy's. At which point, Abby basically asks, can we go see our friends? And Mike, honestly, I can't remember what Mike says, because, truth be told, you would think that basically there shouldn't be any danger now that Afton is dead, but he doesn't necessarily trust these animatronic characters considering how dangerous they are. So the movie just kind of ends with the camera panning out of the window, but then we cut back to Freddy's. We basically watch as the camera goes through the restaurant, through the kitchen. We see everything is kind of ruined. We get to the back rooms where we see Afton in the iconic position. He's lying on the floor, propped up against something, writhing in pain, and we see the ghost of Golden Freddy slowly closing the door on him, basically keeping him prisoner there. And that's the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I gotta admit that I like the fact that they actually used the song, the Five Nights at Freddy's song by the Living Tombstone, in the credits sequence. That was a nice touch. So, my overall thoughts on the movie, like I mentioned throughout the spoiler review, it is a bit of a mixed bag. So, take of that what you will. The thing is that this movie actually gave me a rather unique opportunity to actually look at the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise with fresh eyes, because the Fnaf franchise has sort of stopped being fun over the last few years because the lore has gotten so convoluted that you can't really keep it straight anymore. It's not really something that you can actually quantify as being enjoyable anymore. However, I think that this movie can actually give some perspective on what it is that Scott actually wants to do with the franchise and what he's been trying to do for the last few game titles now. Because one of the controversial things about FNAF Help Wanted is that the game starts out by basically implicating that the first few Five Nights at Freddy's games were actually all an elaborate hoax that was concocted by a rogue indie game developer, Scott himself, basically to kind of tarnish the Fazbear Entertainment brand. However, later on in the game, we're given the impression that it wasn't a rogue indie game developer. Fazbear Entertainment hired that guy and had him make those games as part of a large, elaborate corporate rebranding. As in, they wanted to make light of what happened in order to get people to stop thinking about it. And that's how we get introduced to Vanessa. She was one of the characters that was working on this game, and, well, somehow or another, the spirit of William Afton got saved onto a hard drive from the Springtrap animatronic, and it got scanned into the game, and now William Afton is kind of existing as kind of like this haunted living virus or whatever. And that's how we get Vanessa, that is the character she is in the FNAF Security Breach game. Now, one of the things that I was ultimately apprehensive about of this game, of this movie, was the inclusion of Vanessa, because ultimately, she is a bit of a conundrum when it comes to the FNAF franchise, but I honestly had a different sort of take on her watching this movie, and it kind of gave me this new theory that what if what Help Wanted said was actually partly true, and partly untrue. My theory is that the first 3 games, FNAF 1 through 3, those are based on real events that actually did happen, but everything that came after FNAF 3 was bullshit. That it was actually those games that were part of the elaborate rebrand to try and distance the franchise away from the Afton legacy in order to cover it up. That would, of course, mean that Elizabeth Afton didn't actually exist, and that Michael Afton is not actually an Afton at all. That the character that we thought Mike Schmidt was, Mike Schmidt, Mike Afton, the protagonist throughout all the FNAF games, isn't actually an Afton at all. That was just a means of tying up the story. So this would ultimately mean that I think that basically what Scott is trying to do is trying to remove some of the things about the franchise that he knows didn't go over, weren't all that well received, and probably things that he probably doesn't like anymore, and is trying to make a more linear and more cohesive story. And I think that going forward, I think that we can ultimately accept the fact that this would ultimately mean that Vanessa is actually William Afton's daughter because Elizabeth Afton never actually existed, or she never actually was transformed into Baby. That was something that came up with for the game, and that she instead changed her name, changed her identity to Vanessa in order to get away from her father. But this would also mean that Mike isn't Afton's son. And that's honestly one of the things I'm kind of flipping-flopping about with the movie, because I ultimately never really liked that twist, the idea that the protagonist, Mike Schmidt from the first game, ended up being the son of the main villain of the entire franchise. It always felt out of left field for me. However, I honestly expected them to do that in this movie. I honestly expected it to be revealed that the reason that Afton kidnapped Mike's brother is because he actually was having an affair with Mike's mom, and that he was under the impression that one of the kids was actually his. So he kidnapped Mike's brother, thinking that Garrett was actually Mike, who, as it turns out, actually is Afton's son. I honestly thought that was going to be revealed in the third act of the movie once Afton finally got off his ass and started doing something. The problem is that, well, without that being in the movie, Afton really has no motivation outside of being a sick child killer. So it's like, okay, is this the William Afton that the games want to present him as? Or is this the William Afton that we had to infer from playing FNAF 1, 2, and 3 all this time? You see, that one point, the point where the franchise turned, was in FNAF 4, and it's such a crucial moment because it seems like that is the linchpin of this entire series. This movie feels like it's more based on FNAF 1, 2, and 3 with a little reference to Security Breach thrown in, while at the same time also going out of its way to say FNAF 4, Sister Location, and Pizzeria Simulator are not important. But I think maybe I've spoken enough. I'm actually kind of surprised that the puppet didn't make any sort of appearance in this game. In this movie, sorry. I'm surprised that the puppet didn't have any sort of role in this movie, which is kind of odd considering that Golden Freddy kind of has the role of the puppet, you would kind of think, so. But there is something, because I stayed and watched the entire credit sequence, and the movie does one last thing. You guys remember in FNAF 2, whenever you play the mini-games, and the mini-games are so named because you hear an electronic distorted voice spelling out words, one letter at a time, words that say, save him, save them, help them. And the thing about it is you can't. When you get to the end credits of the Fnaf movie, you actually hear that same distorted voice spelling out letters one at a time. C-O-M. It spells out, "Come find me." I think that might be a teaser setting up Five Nights at Freddy's 2, because I think that with how successful this movie has been, FNAF 2 is definitely going to happen. And I would really like to see what the toy animatronics look like. I wonder if it's going to be a prequel or a sequel to this game. However, what is the most important aspect of this Come Find Me Easter egg? I think it might be the puppet. It might be the puppet spelling out "Come Find Me" because, one, the puppet is arguably one of the most crucial characters from the franchise, and yet it wasn't featured in this movie. The puppet is Springtrap's nemesis, so that really cannot go understated. And now that William Afton is trapped and under captivity, I think that the puppet wants to be discovered so that it can be freed from wherever it's currently being held, so that it can come to this Freddy's location, find William Afton, and make sure he continues to suffer in silence. But anyways, I've basically talked myself hoarse over the last 2 hours talking about Five Nights at Freddy's. Thank you guys so much for listening if you got this far. I would recommend going to see the movie, but temper your expectations and try to basically leave your subjectivity at the door, because it's definitely not going to be the Five Nights at Freddy's movie that you personally want it to be, but maybe that's okay. So, hope you all have a great time, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Later.